Okay, welcome back to this series of my extended unscripted rants on things I feel like talking about. I'm a little bit under the weather today, so if my voice sounds a bit more nasally or congested than usual, please bear with me or go watch something else. So, HCG is the topic I would like to speak about today. And HCG is a topic that a lot of people like to speak about. And a lot of noise gets made on this topic with very little verdict or outcome that I have seen actionable or really that follows a logical paradigm around reasoning, but also around practical application of what to actually do about it. So I hope to speak around the topic a little bit today to give people some context and insight. For those who would like a more succinct version, you can check out my ebook. You can either trade me 29 of your hard-earned dollars or 15 minutes of your time to get a relatively similar answer. I'll also be doing a webinar on this topic, as well as fertility and estrogen, which are related in the same spectrum of areas, for Marek Health in February. So you can also stay tuned for that or tune in and watch a similar thing again. I spoke on this at the Olympia recently, and this is a topic that there's probably more disagreements on this topic than anything else in this space, I think. Maybe estrogen could tie with this. So, a couple of points I would like to make about HCG as overarching points. And for people who don't want to watch the whole video, if you would like the too long didn't read version, should you use HCG with TRT? Yes with an if, no with a but. Sorry. It's not that straightforward. And before anyone leaves any comments, if you are stupid enough to leave a comment on my YouTube channel without watching the whole video, I will fucking scold you. I will take the time out of my day just to reply to your comment if you are that stupid. So, firstly, when it comes to HCG, what you need to understand is that HCG is volatile in practice. If you take 100 guys on TRT and you put them on HCG, you're going to get a huge varying response, even if the dose is adjusted, even with all other factors taken into account, even when you control for other variables that usually influence outcomes of hormonal intervention, like alcohol use, obesity, diet and lifestyle, particularly exercise, sleep, mental health, careers, all these different things. The thing that irks me about HCG, as someone who likes to solve problems, is that I have not been able to find the variable which causes people to respond well to HCG or not respond well to HCG. It seems to be random. I have some theories that I will discuss today that maybe it's not so random, but these are just theories and my hypotheses, because at the end of the day, we don't know. And people who act like they don't know and speak in extremes or who speak in definitive terms with HCG are creating a false sense of authority to most likely sell you shit that you don't need. One thing that you will find that is very common in the space regarding HCG is the people who say that HCG is a must also sell HCG. Find me one person in this space who is not financially incentivized by you or their clients or patients using HCG who promotes it as mandatory. Feel free to click out of the video and come back and leave me a comment if you can find someone. There is no one. Because when you stop being financially incentivized by the sale of pharmaceutical medications, which I think is corrupt, but each to their own, I suppose, you find that people form a more rational and more realistic approach to the use of HCG, as well as recognizing it for what it is. Is HCG required on TRT? Is it mandatory for TRT? No, absolutely fucking not. And the most important part of why the evidence for that is there, outside of the fact that a good chunk of people just don't fucking tolerate the stuff, so you can have whatever mechanistic theory you like. If you have mechanistic theory that the sky is green and I go outside all day and say it's blue, doesn't really matter what your mechanistic theory is. So if HCG is not tolerated by a good chunk of people, then it can't be mandatory to use on TRT because it just doesn't work. Bottom line. But That's not the most important point. The most important point is that every single study on TRT ever showing all the benefits of testosterone replacement therapy, all of them, don't involve the concurrent use of HCG. So, HCG is not evidence based for the context that we're talking about it. There's actually no studies that support this. This is all essentially bro science. You could call it pseudoscience if you like. You could even call it being ahead of the curve if you want to be optimistic. But it's not evidence based medicine and it's not tolerated by a good chunk of people. What percentage of people don't tolerate HCG? In my experience, somewhere between 30 and 50%. But I probably get a biased client population because people tend to come to me when they have problems. So conservatively, we'll call it a third. And for the sake of this video and the sake of my upcoming webinar and my book, we're going to call it a third. Now, that's the hard line of it. Now, the second part of the question is HCG beneficial to use on TRT, which is a very different discussion from is it needed? People often can't differentiate those two or get past the nuance between those points as a roadblock. Baffles me. But anyway, this is where we're at. Is HCG beneficial to use on TRT? That's the yes with an if, no with a but kind of thing. And one, it depends on if you tolerate it. Because if you don't tolerate it, then no, it's not going to be beneficial for you to use individually. And this is where people need to put their N=1 experiences aside and why people argue about what other medications people should take when they're not actually practicing or working in this field. Completely over my head, but again, each to their own. But the thing that people need to understand is that HCG is not a luteinizing hormone mimetic. And this term gets parroted all the time. And I really don't like getting too specific over terms and definitions because that's what they are. But when people use this as an argument for something, I think we need to break down what this means. Mimetic means it does the same thing. It mimics something. HCG and luteinizing hormone are not the same thing. Do they bind to the same receptor? Yes, it's actually called the LH-HCG receptor, funnily enough. But they don't do the same thing. They actually do a lot of very different things. And if they did the same thing, women would just make more luteinizing hormone during pregnancy. So HCG, although yes, it is found in very, very trace amounts in men and in women who aren't pregnant, in physiological amounts that we're talking about for using something like HCG therapy, combined with TRT, that amount is not native to a man under any context. It's also not native to a woman who's not pregnant. It's only present in biology in these kind of doses in a very specific amount. Now, the amount of HCG that a woman makes at the end of her first trimester is much greater than the amount that we are injecting for men on TRT, which tends to be doses of 250 to 500 units per shot in divided doses, depending on your practitioner, depending on what you're doing. But what people need to understand is that there is a very logical reason why it seems a bunch of men don't tolerate this stuff, and it's that HCG has no business being in a man's body, and we don't really know that well what it does or does not do. We know that it activates the luteinizing hormone receptors in the testicles. We know that it activates luteinizing hormone receptors systemically in the body, particularly in the spine, the nervous system, in the brain. It's actually present in a lot of organs, but what does it actually do? We don't really know. What are the effects of running this in a low dose, let's say around 1,000 units or sub 1,000 units per week for years, decades over the course of your lifetime? We don't know. You're going to be the guinea pig. We'll find out. And this is something that I have a bias towards. When in doubt, leave it out. That's just my general approach, and I like it because it rhymes. But when we're looking at what HCG is and what luteinizing hormone is, it creates a difficult question to answer. And this is the question that I think needs to be more focused on in this whole debate mess of shit. And this is the question, is it advantageous or is it better to keep the luteinizing hormone receptors active, agonized, by something which is not luteinizing hormone? Or is it better to leave the receptors dormant, given that we have fulfilled the end role of sex hormone production with testosterone and then the aromatization to estradiol? That is the question. And then the second question, which is a follow-up to that, is HCG an appropriate substitute for luteinizing hormone? Because a lot of the time in this discussion, people are talking about HCG as if it is luteinizing hormone, which I think, and this is my theory, that if it was luteinizing hormone, if we were able to use an esterized recombinant luteinizing hormone in place of HCG, we'd probably get almost universal tolerability because it's actually a part of your operating system in the context that we're using it. But that's not what we're using here. And a lot of the time, the debate and the discussions is as if we are, and we are not. And I think that that distinction between HCG and luteinizing hormone, and I don't think this is rocket science either. I think this is just fucking common sense. I think the differentiation between the two is also the reason why HCG produces side effects in a number of men. And I also have a theory that HCG may, and I'm not saying it does, I'm saying it may, also produce negative outcomes in the men who tolerate it. It's just that they may not have the awareness of what it's doing, one, or, and this is something else that's really important when we're looking at hormone replacement therapy and using exogenous hormones and overriding the body's natural operating system, is that some things can have pros and cons. Some things can have benefits and drawbacks at the same time. And depending on the situation that you're in, sometimes the subjective benefits of HCG could potentially outweigh some of the drawbacks, depending on if these benefits are band-aiding or masking an underlying issue. And I think that's something that happens a lot. And I wonder if, and I guess that there is the alternate argument to this is, do the guys who don't tolerate HCG, are they just making up placebo effects and hyperfixating on something that's not a problem? I'm sure some guys would argue that. I think that's nonsense based on the fact that it is a female pregnancy hormone and we do see side effects that are quite objective. But I guess the question is this actually benefiting the patient population as a whole who do tolerate it? Or is it actually causing side effects and drawbacks that they may not be aware of and they may not be astute or attuned into? And could this be something that down the track causes problems? We don't know because it hasn't been studied in this context. So I do not want this to create fear. I do not want this to create people freaking out that they're taking something they shouldn't be taking and then going back to their practitioner and saying, well, I saw this guy on YouTube say this and now you're poisoning me with this female pregnancy hormone and I want out. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that there needs to be a middle ground in this discussion, which is that if you do benefit from HCG in the short term, does that mean it's good for you in the long term? Maybe. Maybe not. But the most important argument that I think it's important to focus on here, and for the people who are like, it's getting to the end of the video and he hasn't spoken about fertility, I'm going to do a separate video on that one, calm your farm. But the most important thing that I think here, which I would like to drill down and I'm going to repeat before I finish the video, is that HCG is not mandatory for TRT. It's simply not. And again, I have not seen anyone who does not sell HCG who says that it is. And I think that's very telling. So there are thousands of men who have been using TRT without HCG for decades. Every study on TRT has been done without HCG to date, which has shown benefit. Is it optimal and ideal to have luteinizing hormone receptors be dormant and the testicles go essentially offline? No. Is it more optimal than hypogonadism? Yes. That is the point of TRT. Is TRT perfect? No. But is HCG a perfect replacement for luteinizing hormone? No. And this comes back to the rhetorical question, which I posed earlier. Is it better to agonize the luteinizing hormone receptors with something that is not luteinizing hormone that may cause side effects in the short term and we don't know the outcomes of using it in the long term? Or is it better to leave it dormant and unactivated for the time that you're on TRT? I don't know. And I think it's case by case, and I think it's something we're going to learn more about as the years go on. But the most important thing that I would like to drill home again for the umpteenth time is HCG required for TRT? Absolutely not.